Now, it's obvious that Australia has experienced a recession, particularly in 2020. A recession is where you have two consecutive quarters of negative economic growth, and that occurred in the March and June quarters of 2020. The annual real GDP growth for the year of 2020 was negative 6.2%. So we can definitely say that we've experienced a recession for that period and a recovery that has been progressing over the period of 2021. The impact of the recession can be clearly seen in the labour market statistics. The unemployment rate peaked at 7.4% and has gradually declined back to its pre-COVID levels. And the underlying inflation rate dipped downwards from 1.7% to 1.3% and then 1.2%, and has started to creep up again now to its pre-COVID levels. But we can also see the impact on the labour market with respect to the participation rate. We can see here that the participation rate collapsed in the March period and slowly recovered over the course of 2020. This indicates that a large number of people left the labour market altogether. That is, they didn't show up in the unemployment statistics, despite the fact that they obviously didn't have a job. How do we explain this recession? Well, we can say there are two elements to it. We can talk about an aggregate supply side shock and an aggregate demand side shock. With respect to aggregate supply, obviously it was the government's immediate and continuing response to the COVID pandemic of containment strategies. That is, travel restrictions, social distancing, and lockdowns of local government areas and entire states. This resulted in severe supply chain disruption and the closure of a number of businesses. The overall impact is a decrease in aggregate supply, especially in the sectors of food and accommodation, tourism, education, and the arts and culture. With respect to aggregate demand, you now know about the major components of aggregate demand, C plus I plus G plus NX. But here, if we focus on just the private components of aggregate demand, we can say that consumption spending has fallen due to increased uncertainty about future employment by households, a fall in some households' incomes, along with continuing debt burdens, and a negative wealth effect, where there can be a fall in asset values, even if only temporarily, which can cause households to decrease their consumption spending. Investment spending has also fallen due to uncertainty about future profits, especially in manufacturing, construction, and tourism. And then there's net export revenue. This has fallen, although it has fluctuated actually quite considerably, but it did temporarily fall drastically due to travel bans and uncertainty about the future, especially with respect to tertiary education and tourism exports. The overall impact has been to decrease aggregate demand in the economy. We can represent the idea of this recession using a Keynesian cross model. The Keynesian cross model indicates an equilibrium in the economy where expenditure equals income. When there's a fall in consumption spending, investment spending, net export spending, leaving aside government expenditure for the moment, then you have a fall or a shift downwards in the aggregate expenditure line, resulting in a new lower equilibrium level of private spending and real GDP. But that model doesn't really show anything to do with prices. If we go to the aggregate demand, aggregate supply model, then we can incorporate that into our representation. So here we can see a fall in aggregate supply and a simultaneous fall in aggregate demand. So we get an overall decrease in real GDP, a recession, and a slight fall in the price level. In fact, we did have a period of deflation.